Hello friends, this is Risa here with Soul Science. You have to excuse my absence. There's been a lot happening on this end, and I went traveling and was helping someone move, and anyway, there's been a lot moving, which is actually quite a nice little intro to the theme of today's video, which is of course the third ray of aspect, which is the final ray of the three major rays, which end up comprising and influencing the following four rays, as we will explore shortly in our next videos. But today we'll be looking at the third ray, and the first thing to say about the third ray in the context of the first two is that if we consider the following rays from that number one having a corrective quality, where we have the first ray as a ray of energy and will and force and power and this masculine penetration, the second ray comes in with an oppositional or a corrective force where it has this quality of diffusion and magnetizing and attracting and merging and bringing together. And with the third ray, we have another correcting quality, whereby with the second ray there is this magnetic unity, a fusion of all these different energies, and that creation of that matrix, the womb, with the mother energy. The third ray brings in a quality of refinement and discernment, and starting to take the forms that are in that matrix and get a little bit more with scrutiny specific about how forms are built and brought together. So in that way, the third ray is extremely creative. And of course, the first two are creative in a way. The first ray initiates the creative process. The second ray brings and magnetizes the materials that are used for that creative process. But the third ray really speaks to the creative process itself. What is creativity? To create something, to bring something into being, into manifestation. It requires more of this concentrated, and in a human way, a very mental focus. We have to go, okay, I need to bring this here, I need to put that there, and well, that's not going to be efficient there with how those two relate. So the third ray can bring this slightly more logical and discerning quality that brings more of, and this is a key word of the third ray, that aspect of intelligence, in contrast with the second ray word, wisdom. Because we might think, well, what's the difference between wisdom and intelligence? Wisdom is much more, it's a more abstract, not necessarily abstract, but more holistic, perhaps. It's more inclusive, it's more general, these general principles or these general ways of life, whereas the third ray and the intelligence aspect has more of this, again, specificity. We're getting a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of how something is put together. So where the first ray is the creator, the hero, the initiator, and to some degree the inventor, sure, with the initiating quality, although inventor is a bit first and third ray, let's say, bringing together. And the second ray is the teacher, the healer, the lover, the illuminator. The third ray is very much the ray of the genius, the mathematician, the philosopher, and just generally a very active and creative type. It's much more mutable and movement oriented. It's adaptable, and now we're heading into the virtues. There's an adaptability with the third ray. There's, of course, that discerning quality that we talked about, that specificity. There is very much a mental quality to the third ray, which is why the philosopher tends to be found on the third ray, because it's about, yes, the mental abstraction has a sort of, let's say, a floating above, but it's about bringing ideas together and getting quite concrete. And you really see that when you study, let's say, a Plato or a Socrates type. It's quite specific in terms of how they're bringing ideas and concepts together. So that intellectual abstraction, mental stimulation, and that movement. And in contrast with the second ray, where the second ray can have that the shadow sometimes of a neuroses in terms of suffering and pain and worry. The third ray actually brings more of a logical and down-to-earth response to some of those qualities. However, it can portray a sort of nervousness. There can be a nervousness which is almost a bit more even physical, actually, with the third ray, where it's like you're moving around too much. So sometimes third ray people can have that problem of too much mental stimulation, or that tendency to sort of disappear. They can disappear up into mental abstraction, and of course that would be a vice of the third ray. That use of mind to disappear out of reality. That would be a shadow personality expression of the third ray, where a positive expression, an integrated expression of that mental abstraction element of the third ray would be the application of cleverness and intelligence into real meaningful endeavours, applying them to real world problems, making sure that they remain practical in terms of the needs of the daily life and whatever the person is seeking to serve. So it's a bit of a catch-22 where, yes, the third ray is much more practical of a ray when we compare it to rays 1 and 2. In terms of an individual temperament, there can be sometimes a shadow of impracticality insofar as that there's just that practicality is reduced to a kind of mental masturbation in a way, whereby, yes, it disappears up into the mind, and that sort of absent professor, I'm recalling Alan Oken referring to that in his book as one of the shadows of the third ray, the absent-minded professor, sort of off alone in his thoughts, but kind of disassociated or disconnected from reality. Because of that practical element of the third ray, we also see businessmen, entrepreneurial type of people, and people that are good with material wealth and money on the third ray as well. And again, that dual aspect. The abstract philosopher, where there's a bringing together of the mental substance and applying that same principle of mental cleverness, but to more of the material realm, where it's about how do we bring things together to make a business work or generate money. Again, it's how to use the materials. Second ray gravitates the materials and brings them into this possibility to be moved with. And then there's that refinement and that specificity with the third ray, where it starts to get more concrete and more practical. So you can see how a businessman type would be on the third ray as well. And the shadow in the businessman expression would be that the manipulation of matter and the materialism, attachment to matter, or manipulating other people, or being able to figure out how to use someone else's resources for personal gain. So the vices, right? Manipulation, using that cleverness to get what one wants out of matter, these kinds of things. And we see a little bit of that in the first ray, but it's more of this dominating, I'm the boss sort of thing. I have to be at the center. A third ray, shadowy kind of person won't necessarily be the boss. Third ray people are good managers, in fact, but it's more about maybe puppeteering behind the scenes, or using the intellect and the intelligence for personal gain and for shadowy purposes. So what else can I say about the third ray? Third ray people tend to be pretty good physically. There's that adaptability and that the translating of that cleverness of mental energy into physical activity. It's actually a good thing, particularly for a third ray person who does express in quite a mental way, to ground some of their energy and balance it out through not just reducing it to purely mental abstraction, where it can become that sort of isolation and dissociation through the mind, but to apply that intelligence with physical activity. So yeah, they can be quite physically adaptable and coordinated quite naturally. What else? Cleverness, the shadow of, and we kind of hinted at this already, but intellectual pride. That bolstering one's self-image up through an attachment or identification with cleverness. Oh, I am so clever, I have such a high IQ, I am so academic, I am so philosophical, and therefore I am great. And of course, we see this all the time. Someone can be a genius in terms of their intellect, but they can be a terrible person or emotionally really disconnected, or that, intellect is not the same as wisdom. It's not the same as compassion. It's also not the same as drive and will, hinting to the first ray qualities. That's where you see the comic book guy from The Simpsons who has a really high IQ, but he's basically pretty useless, right? He works in the comic book stories, however old, and still lives with his mum. But he's kind of bitter and resentful because he thinks that his intellect and how intelligent he is should mean that he should have more success in his life. So intellectual pride, materialism and manipulation are the shadows, and the positive attributes are very much that adaptability, capacity for logic and discernment and bringing things down to earth. A third ray person, if they're working with a first and second ray, will take the creative energy and the idea and the idealism from the first and second rays and go, okay, yes, but how do we bring that into being? How do we bring that into being? So that pragmatism, that figuring out how to bring things together and place them properly. Again, why it's oriented towards businessmen and philosophical thinkers, bringing ideas together, bringing principles together, and figuring out how they can, especially when you consider something like Stoicism. It's like logic and to live life by. It's that sort of practical living to some extent. So let's consider now some of the zodiacal signs that the third ray expresses through. The first sign, and it's the strongest expression of the third ray at this time, as I understand it, is Cancer. We might be more inclined to think of Cancer as being on the second ray line because it's typically associated with the mother and nurturing. But when we think it's like taking that concept of the mother a next step, where we think of, let's see what goes on at the biological level during conception. There's very much this bringing together of the material of the body, of the cells, and formulating it into the form. So this is that third ray energy in Cancer. And yes, the bringing together, the creation of the form. And of course, Cancerians are sometimes known to be all about figuring out what everyone needs. And of course, there's a loving quality in that, but there's also a very practical quality in that. Okay, I'm nesting. I'm a mother who's nesting. What's actually needed? What's going to make my capacity to look after another individual most efficient? What are those things that I need to bring to myself, and how do I need to organize them? So that third ray quality through the mother archetype, as a matter of fact, through Cancer. The other sign is Libra, and in Libra we see more of that intellectual practicality, where Libra, the scales, we're talking about relationship, how are two things brought together, what's the right give and take. It's all of that contemplation and dialogue and dialectic and figuring out, how do these two fit together? And what's the practical way that we relate these two? The second ray is about synthesizing, but it's more of this blending. And whereas with Libra, it's more of that, but what actually is that thing, and how do we relate them? What is the right law? How do we apply a right principle here? If you think about a legal process, it's about weighing those different things and what's true and what's false. Again, that sort of discernment quality of the third ray. And that's how it expresses through Libra. And Libra is a lot about right principle, right law, strong Librans who express a little bit more at the soulful level. Often are great writers or great people that bring in new ideas and new principles and figure out how to relate things together. And it has a very practical undertone to that process. And the final sign that the third ray expresses through is Capricorn. And of course, Capricorn is opposite to Cancer, so there's this relationship there. In Capricorn, we see the merging of those qualities of the third ray that we discussed previously in more of that business energy, finance. Capricorn's all about how do we bring the things together in that outer world context. What is the right way that this system should be structured? What is the right way to structure my business? Capricorn is often associated with business and finance in that way, and institutions as well, that practical component. And as we explored with the first ray, because the first ray also expresses through Capricorn, so you get that flavour of the practical ambitious. So it's about that building of the practical system and efficiency behind those systems and the most practical way to bring them into being. I think that's a pretty good general summary for the purposes of this introductory video. And to finalise, we need to explore as well the two planetary rulers of the third ray. The non-sacred planet ruling the third ray is the Earth. The Earth as a third ray planet. And one of the beautiful things about Earth is we can really see that very literal genius, creative intelligence archetype of the third ray through nature on Earth. One of the best images for the third ray is the spider web, right? And think of the spider as well. It's often that considered that archetypal figure of Mother Nature, along with things like snakes as well. But that kind of the scary mother. But when you look at how a spider creates a web and that beautiful patterning behind it, right? It's very specific and particular. And the same thing with the Fibonacci sequence, or how a flower blooms, and the intelligent creative patterning that we see emerge through nature time and time and time again. It's a great way to really anchor in and understand the third ray. That adaptability, once again, with the third ray. The way in which nature changes and moves and adapts and sort of takes one thing from here and here and blends them and produces this thing and this thing and this thing. It's fast moving, it's clever, it's intelligent. Again, key word, intelligence for the third ray. And in terms of our solar logos being a second ray solar system that we talked about in the second ray video, it's interesting to think about Earth, as the esotericists will say, Earth within that greater solar system is considered the throat chakra of the solar system. And the third ray actually corresponds to the throat. The first ray corresponds to the head, second ray to the heart, third ray to the throat. And the throat is typically associated with creativity, expression, bringing something into manifestation. That's what the throat center is all about. When you speak, you are spelling words. If we're considering the English etymology, one spells words when they write, when they articulate. And what does it mean to articulate, not just verbally, but to articulate an idea, to crystallize an idea? And we see also crystallization on planet Earth in some of her substances, right? Crystallization, substantiation with the third ray. So a great cleverness with Earth and that expression, the throat center being the creative expression in the individual, and that at a macrocosmic level being reflected in the solar system as well. And when we think about human beings on planet Earth, much of how we succeed and much of the things that we need as human beings, yes, we all need love, but a large part of being a human being is practical, is it not? It's having these basic needs met. And here we see that hinting to Cancer once again, the mother archetype. We need food, we need shelter, these basic organizing things, bringing things together so that we can function. And even the way people relate to one another, we can have this very poetic, romantic idea about love in terms of intimate relationship, but a great deal of what makes intimate relationship work between humans is practical organization, understanding who does what job and how do you work out problems. It's all very practical. And then again, Libra, right, the working out of a problem and the solving of a problem, what's the right give and take. Very much a practical quality to living a human life, and that's mirrored through the Earth. And then the second planetary ruler of the third ray, which is Saturn. And Saturn, of course, has a very intimate linking with Earth. Of course, the Saturn return is often a big experience for many people, whether it's more of a personality-oriented time where there's simply significant changes in career or someone moves somewhere. But esoterically, Saturn has a lot to do with figuring out how to properly structure one's life, taking responsibility for the karmic patterns and starting to deal with the crystallization of old and dead forms that one might need to penetrate with maybe perhaps a bit more of a first ray impulse to release and start rebuilding. So this is a lot of the Saturn qualities, and I don't want this to be a treatment on Saturn, of course. But Saturn has the rings around it, and it is very much about that, bringing it into concretization. Saturn is that process of concretization, focus. How are you going to build this? How are you going to make this work? Are you dealing with this? Once again, it's that practicality, that orientation towards responsibility. And Saturn rules Capricorn at all three layers of manifestation: personality, soul, and monadic, or the spirit level as well. So it's that same theme developing in a more subtle way through that archetypal evolution. But again, practicality, refinement, and Saturn, of course, also represents the mind in esoteric astrology, which will be a conversation for another time. But Saturn is very much the mental body. When the chart starts to express through a solar level, through an esoteric level, an esoteric lens, Saturn begins to appear as that mental process, dealing with the mental body. So when people go through difficult challenges with Saturn, it's often about confronting the mind and how the mind is operating, the right use of mental energy, and developing concentration, which, by the way, concentration, I forgot to mention, is part of one of the vices. Oh, sorry, not the vices, the virtues of the third ray. That ability to concentrate and ponder intellectual and abstract ideas for long periods of time. Time also has a lot to do with the third ray as well. And we can see the connection to time, our mortality here on Earth, third ray, and Saturn also being the lord of karma and the lord of time, right? Kronos, the Kronos myth and all of that kind of thing. And so sometimes third ray people can have a little bit of neuroses around time. They can worry about time and getting things done, and have they organized everything properly? So a different kind of neurosis to the second ray person. But yes, Earth and Saturn both having this intimate relationship with practicality and creativity, and the Earth having this very spontaneous, organic creativity, and Saturn bringing about that the tests and the challenges that need to be overcome to create and manifest, bring into being one's creative work in this lifetime, one's soulful work. So once again, one has to graduate beyond the tests of Saturn to practically manifest. Throat chakra, the active intelligence, the creative adaptability, bringing something into being. Third ray, activate and actualize into the living life. That's what the third ray is all about. So I think that's a good summary for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Talk to you soon.